Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Daphne. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library, and it is my pleasure to present Martin Fischer for our first program for National Family History Month for this October. Martin Fischer is a professional genealogist and Vice President of Publicity for the Jewish Genealogical Society of Illinois. He is also a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, St. Louis Genealogical Society, the Jewish Genealogical Society of Illinois, the American Copy Editor Society, and Editorial Freelancers Association. He has been doing genealogy since the 1970s and has an extensive family history website at the web address on the screen. He has written articles for the Quarterly Journal of the Illinois State Genealogical Society, the St. Louis Genealogical Society Quarterly, Avotanu, the International Review of Jewish Genealogy, Morasha, the Jewish Genealogical Society of Illinois newsletter, and the Chicago Tribune. So welcome, Martin. Thank you for joining us today. Before we jump into the program, just a few housekeeping items to go over, as is tradition. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program today, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A feature or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. Martin has graciously provided me with a handout for today, and I will send the link to the handout in the chat once we get started, so then you can go ahead and download that at your leisure. There is a survey available after the webinar, as well as in the follow-up email. If you have time, please complete the survey. We love hearing your feedback, and it really does help us move forward with our programming in a positive way. And if you're curious about Martin's writing, his contact information, or anything that's kind of presented today, you can visit his website at martinfisher.webs.com for some goodies in there that that might be beneficial to you as you move forward with your writing, or maybe give you some ideas. And one last thing before we jump in, just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. If at any point you're having audio trouble, you can check your audio settings down here. If you have any problems and you can't figure something out and you just want to get my attention, you can use the raise hand button here. I will then send you a message and hopefully be able to help you. And as I mentioned, for questions, there are two options. You can use the Q&A feature that's here, or the chat feature here. You can send those questions to us and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the program. So that is everything that I have for you. It is my pleasure to turn it over to Martin now.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew went over this. One thing I would add that is somewhat relevant is a few years ago, I did spend a few years teaching introductory college writing classes in person for the University of Phoenix. So genealogical expression can take many different forms or formats. It can be handwritten, typed, digital. It could include images and sounds and art. It can be presentations such as this. There can be family history videos, lectures, even dramatic performances, music, dance, poetry, and songs. A couple years ago, one of the members of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Illinois wrote a couple short plays that were presented at one of our then in-person meetings, using members of our group as volunteers to portray a family history incident from her ancestry. And one of the groups that I was formerly a member of, the International Society of Family History Writers and Editors, used to hold an annual Excellence in Writing contest in which all the expected categories were included, but there was also a category for poetry and songs. Family history writers have a multiplicity of choices as to the form their writing can take. The next few slides describe some of the more traditional forms that family history writing can take. A family history website or blog can range from a simple online list of ancestral surnames to a more complex, more ambitious site that includes family trees, articles, photos, maps, documents, letters, and much more. A family history podcast or video can feature oral history interviews with older family members or provide visual or audio genealogy presentations. Of course, family history books can be a goal for many of us. It might be printed, it could be digital, it might be published commercially or self-published. A book can provide a much more complete, well-organized compilation of family history. It can be produced through traditional print technology or modern digital or online formats. If it is good enough, a commercial publisher might produce it for an author. If no such commercial publisher is interested, or if the author's goal is to limit the availability of the book to just family and friends, then self-publishing is an option. Another option for family history writing is a family newsletter, which could be published very easily by almost any of us. It might be issued annually, quarterly, or monthly. It might be printed and snail mailed, or it might be presented digitally and emailed. A family history newsletter is usually much more current than genealogy research writing. However, there is no reason such a publication should not include genealogical information, such as articles commemorating anniversaries of ancestors' deaths, or reporting on and sharing with family recent research discoveries, such as finding previously unknown relatives. A personal memoir can be a keepsake to hand down to descendants. It could be a tribute to a beloved relative. It might explain an important event in a family's history. A personal memoir written by you or by an older family member can be a valuable resource of anecdotal information for future generations. Oral history of a friend or a relative can be especially treasured. It may just be in the form of notes that were taken during an in-person interview, or it might be an audio or video recording that was then transcribed. I treasure to this day the interview that I had with my late aunt, who I had interviewed when she was in her late 80s, who died just a couple years ago at the age of 101. Oral history can be a treasure trove of information worth saving and handing down to children and grandchildren. An article could be written based on your own or someone else's family history. It could be published in a genealogical society newsletter, quarterly, or put on one of their websites. It might be published in a genealogy magazine or blog. Family history articles can be shared with a wider audience through general interest genealogy publications or genealogical society publications or websites. The basic writing process we've all learned in school. All of us had some experience with learning and using the writing process. This brief overview is just one example. There are usually 5 stages in writing: generating ideas, planning, drafting, revising, and editing. I urge all of you to write as soon as the inclination is felt. Don't wait for a better or later time to write. When an idea strikes for genealogical writing, I urge you to act on it as soon as possible. Otherwise, you might lose the thought or forget something of interest and of value. Always have a notepad, a notebook, a computer, or a tablet nearby so you can immediately jot down your ideas, memories, recollections, questions, contemplations. Right away. If you have the urge to write, I urge you to not delay. The American novelist Louis L'Amour once said, "Start writing no matter what. The water does not flow until the faucet is turned on." One good way of starting the writing process minimizes the pre-planning that traditionally precedes the writing process. It is called stream of consciousness, free writing, or interior monologue. This is not how we were taught in school for most of us. Teachers in our youth encouraged a more structured, traditional process. Stream of consciousness is defined in the American Heritage Dictionary of English Language as a literary technique that presents the thoughts and feelings of a character as they occur. In this case, you are the character, or someone on your family tree is the character. The conscious experience of an individual regarded as a continuous flowing series of images and ideas running through the mind. It's not a well-organized process initially. It may not be completely logical or even chronological, but stream of consciousness writing can be a good starting point for a more complete, more organized written project that you improve and add structure to as you revise and edit. One of the best ways of starting a writing project is to just get the ideas down as soon as possible on paper without any consideration or worries about organization, logic, grammar, punctuation, spelling. The key thing is to get the ideas down and focus on the accuracy. After you have jotted down a very rough first version of your writing, take a break, get some coffee or tea, read a newspaper, take a nap, go shopping, just sleep on it. Come back to your writing refreshed and ready to continue to begin to improve it and enhance it. Then revise, rewrite, edit, and proofread. Using your initial effort, work to improve it. As you read your initial effort, ask yourself these questions. Can it be organized better? Have I left anything out? Are these the best sentences, the best paragraphs? Did I get anything wrong? Does it have potential as a family history document that could be more widely shared? If you're using a stream of consciousness process initially, revising, editing, rewriting, editing, and proofreading are essential follow-up steps. Also ask yourself, are there ideas that don't fit in that might be the source of another kind of writing or that simply need to be deleted? Are there ideas, sentences, or paragraphs that could use more details, facts, or explanations? Can ideas be better connected to each other by inserting transitional phrases or sentences? Usually, even after I think I have finished something in writing that I want to have published in one way or another, I go back to it at least one more time and find that I can insert transitional phrases or sentences that will help the reader move through the piece of writing. As a part of the editing, I urge you to look for and correct punctuation, grammar, accuracy, completeness, and spelling. Here are a couple photos from a local grocery store that I happened to notice while I was walking through doing some shopping. Red cherries and chicken nuddles. So watch out for those spelling errors. As you work on your writing, begin to consider the special characteristics of your product, what you are writing, to decide on the most appropriate format or medium. It could be any of these or more. It could be a family history website, a blog, podcast, or video, a family history book that would be printed or digital, a family newsletter that could be published annually, quarterly, or monthly. It might be a personal memoir that constitutes a keepsake for your descendants, an oral history of a relative or friend, or an article for a genealogical society publication. And in some cases, a particular article that you have written might be appropriate for more than one of these mediums. Once you've determined that your writing will be most appropriate for a particular format, form, or medium, go over it again. And this time, look for how it could be improved to be most appropriate for that chosen medium. Are there formatting issues that need to be dealt with, such as headlines or titles, footnotes or endnotes, illustrations, photos, graphics, maps, photo captions? Consider who will your readers, audience, viewers, or listeners be. Stream of consciousness is not the only option as an initial writing process. If you prefer a more structured traditional method, then the more standard writing steps that I listed early on in this presentation would be for you. This approach usually requires a thesis statement and then either an outline or a mind map. A thesis statement provides the reader with a brief summary or key point of your writing. Good thesis statements also make the readers, listeners, or viewers know more, so they will want to continue to read or pay attention to what you have created. The thesis statement can also help you as a writer focus on the main idea that you are trying to accomplish in your writing. The dictionary.com dictionary defines thesis statement as a short statement, usually one sentence, that summarizes the main point or claim of an essay, research paper, etc., and is developed, supported, and explained in the text by means of examples and evidence. As Andrew mentioned at the beginning, I have a family history website, and here are a few examples of what I feel to be good thesis statements that I created for my family history website. The Fischer and Levin families and their ancestors of various surnames trace their origins to a wide area of Eastern and Central Europe. Ernestine Kober Fischer's tombstone and newspaper obituaries say she was 100 years old when she died in 1924. But earlier documents raise less inflated possibilities. Within 4 months after Hannah Anita Levick emigrated from the uncertainties and poverties of Havana, Cuba, to the freedom and opportunities of St. Louis, Missouri. At least 7 of her relatives were massacred by the Nazis in Pinsk, Poland. Tailors and teachers, peddlers and merchants, caterers and carpenters have all been represented on our family trees. Hanna Anita Levick Fischer was conceived in Russia, born in Poland, grew up in Cuba, and got married, raised a family, and had a career in the United States. The most bizarre and intriguing person, without a doubt, on my family tree was Colonel Abraham Slupsky of St. Louis. So these are some good examples. Whatever you write, it should have some kind of logical structure at some point. A good way of organizing an outline or mind map is to use a logically ordered structure. And they can be organized chronologically, by subject matter, by categories, by family lines or family tree branches, from most important to least important ideas or events, or from least important to most important ideas or events. All of us learned in grade school how to create a simple outline using different levels of information organized into main points, supporting details or examples, and sub-details. Each level of an outline can be written either as a simple phrase or as a complete sentence. If you write an outline using complete sentences, then you are creating a more finished product than if you simply write simple phrases. So what is a mind map? When I was in school, I don't recall ever having heard of anything like a mind map, which is also referred to as a cluster map. Wikipedia defines mind map as a diagram used to visually organize information. A mind map is often created around a single concept drawn as an image in the center of a blank landscape page, to which associated representations of ideas such as images, words, and parts of words are added. A mind map is just a different way of visualizing the same content that one includes in an outline. This is an example of a very generic one using View software that's available for free, I believe, from Tufts University, but you can easily just hand draw one. This mind map is particularly appropriate for this talk because it presents the writing process. It's from the Write at Home blog at blogwriteathome.com and can be viewed starting from the upper left, describing the writing process first as doing research, then pre-writing, then first draft, then revision, finally proofreading and publishing, with various subcategories in smaller circles. Another example that I'm going to show you of a mind map is from my own family history research and writing process. When I sought to establish when a major renovation was completed on my family's mom and pop dry goods store in the Carondelet neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri. It's based on these before and after photos that were taken around the time that the Fischer dry goods store exterior was significantly altered. In researching and writing a short presentation, and then writing an article about this, I focused first on analyzing what could be seen in the photos, followed by researching relevant records, and finally conducting a personal oral history interview with my aunt, who had lived as a child in an apartment above the store. Once you have completed an outline or a mind map as a pre-writing method, then the more formal, more structured writing process itself can begin. Use the structure of ideas that you've created. And as you write, pay attention to the flow of ideas, logic and understanding, sentence structure, factual accuracy, and consistency, keeping your reader's attention and interest. And unless you are under an impending deadline, it is a good idea to take breaks, as I mentioned earlier, during the writing process. Consider sharing your early version with a trusted person whose advice you depend upon. Put your writing aside and get away from it, leave it overnight or longer, and come back to it the next day or the next week. A break from writing will help you feel refreshed so that you can revise, edit, and proofread and your work with fresh eyes. In my long career as a professional copy editor and writing instructor, I have encountered many different writing problems that we should all be aware of. You may or may not be aware of your own writing problems. So I hope these few examples of some of my pet peeves might help improve your own family history writing. If these pointers seem irrelevant to genealogy, I hope you will indulge me briefly, because I will return to more specifically genealogical points very soon. Among the writing problems that I urge you to seek to avoid are misplaced modifiers, which are also often called dangling modifiers, overly long sentences, too many short, simple sentences, vague or abstract sentences, and misuse of words or idiomatic expressions. Most of the examples that I'm going to share with you were written by Chicago Tribune reporters. Here's a misplaced modifier. In addition to students with autism, Giarante said service animals are known to be useful in assisting children with regular seizures. This kind of a sentence can be confusing and unclear to the reader. To clarify this example, I revised it to say, Giarante said service animals are known to be useful in assisting students with autism and children with regular seizures. Another example, opened in 1957 and still owned and operated by the same family, keeping current has been a key to Suburbanite Bowl being in its 60th year of business, said co-owner Julie Anderson. Again, very confusing. I revised it to say, keeping current has been a key to Suburbanite Bowl, which opened in 1957 and still is owned and operated by the same family, said co-owner Julie Anderson. That same problematic sentence was enhanced further by making it say, opened in 1957 and still owned and operated by the same family, Suburbanite Bowl still keeps current during its 60th year of business, said co-owner Julie Anderson. Sentence length can be a problem, particularly with complex or technical subject matter. Here is a quotation from a legal opinion by U.S. Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo. He wrote once of a legal decision, the sentence may be so overloaded with all of its possible qualifications that it will tumble down of its own weight. Size matters in writing. When sentences are too long, they may be confusing or contain hidden errors. When sentences are too short, they may contain insufficient information. When sentences are all about the same length, the lack of variety may fail to keep the reader's attention. When too many sentences are short and simple, they may be distracting to the reader. This is an example of a sentence written by a Chicago Tribune reporter. It has 97 words in this one sentence. It is structurally and grammatically correct, but such a long sentence can be confusing to the reader, at least. So it can easily be trimmed down and divided up into 3 or 4 separate sentences for enhanced clarity. Too many short sentences can reflect a lack of sophistication in writing style. It has been called the Dick and Jane writing style. This one example is from a memoir written by my mother, for whom English was her third language. Most of what she wrote in her memoir was not this juvenile, but these short sentences stood out. She wrote, I liked being in an all-girls class in 5th grade at a public school. The teachers were pleasant and good. Teaching was a very respected profession. I learned to crochet and write poetry. I made sweaters, a hat, and borders on handkerchiefs. Vague and abstract sentences can tend to lack substance or detail. A sentence like, it was a nice day, could be written, the sun shone, a light breeze blew, and it was warm enough to wear shorts and tank tops. A sentence like, she has a pretty car, can be revised and improved by saying, her car sparkled after being washed and polished. I have a lot of books, can be improved with something like, my books filled the shelves that covered one wall of my bedroom. According to dictionary.com, an idiom is a group of words established by usage as having a meaning not deducible from those of the individual words, such as kick the bucket or hang one's head. I have been reading and hearing increasing examples of apparent misuse or corrupted use of idioms, especially in both news and entertainment TV shows. One example, Hurricane Irma is honing in on the state of Florida, which really should be Hurricane Irma is homing in on the state of Florida. To illustrate the patterns of use of idioms, I go to what's called Google's Ngram website, which tabulates how often selected words are used in the Google Books online database of books published between the years 1800 and 2000. The trends shown by the Google Ngram tool have most likely continued to this day, but it's very unlikely that to hone in has caught up with to home in. While both terms were increasingly being used, by the year 2000, the idiomatically correct to home in was being used 4 times more often than the questionable to hone in. Another misuse. The student was poring over her textbooks for an answer. P-O-U-R-I-N-G is not the word we want here. It should be P-O-R-I-N-G. In this example, even though there are instances when P-O-U-R-I-N-G over is appropriate for use in the context of an action involving fluid, according to the Ngram analysis of Google Books, by the year 2000, the idiomatically correct pouring over, P-O-R-I-N-G over, was used 3 times more often than pouring over. Another misuse of an idiom. His statement piqued my interest in learning more. This is a misspelling that is fairly common. On the question of peaks, the double E version has so few examples in Ngram that a chart cannot be generated. Here, Jane is an intelligent, insightful, well-educated, and personable individual, which begs the question, why does she stay at that dead-end job? This is an instance of a misinterpretation of the definition of the phrase begs the question, which in this case, what they really meant to say was raises the question, because the phrase begs the question is properly defined as circular reasoning. It's a philosophical situation that has nothing to do with the idea of raising or asking a question. She waited with bated breath to hear the response. B-A-I-T-E-D is a misuse. According to Minion Fogarty, author of the Grammar Girl blog, baited, B-A-T-E-D, is a form of abate, A-B-A-T-E, which means to diminish, beat down, or reduce. So when you're waiting with bated or abated breath, you're so eager, anxious, excited, or frightened that you're almost holding your breath. With that set phrase, baited, you'll often see a misspelling. The Ngram charts seem to show the correct idiom on the decline, slightly declining, while the corrupted version is increasing in usage. However, the correct abated form was still being used 8 times more often than the incorrect B-A-I-T-E-D version. Now, before concluding this talk, I want to briefly return to some more genealogically relevant questions. As you do your family history research and make discoveries and organize your information, sometimes ideas for articles, books, chapters, or perhaps for a complete book will surface. Based on your own family history and unique aspects of your genealogy, what are you going to write about? Here are some questions to pass on deciding what to tackle in your own writing. Were your ancestors in the military? Did they participate in important military battles? How did your ancestors in the military manage to survive war? How did they cope with their return to civilian life? Did their military experiences help them succeed or lead to difficulties in later life? What professions are represented on your family tree? Did some of your ancestors have important jobs in major companies or other institutions? How did your ancestors' attitudes about making a living influence your own life? Were any of your ancestors famous for their roles in their professions? Did your family suffer in the Holocaust or other major form of tragedy? If your family escaped death, how did they cope with life afterwards as survivors? What documents have you found that are relevant to the tragedy they experienced, such as Yad Vashem pages of testimony or personal memoirs? And how has the family tragedy affected you or your family personally? Were any of your ancestors inventors? If so, how did they come up with their inventions? Did they patent their discoveries? Did they use their inventions to build a successful business? Did they make any scientific or medical discoveries? Do you have a collection of old family letters that might provide new perspectives on understanding your family history? Have you discovered surprising information about your ancestry from old family letters, documents, or Bibles? If these items were written in a foreign language, would it be worthwhile to hire a translator? Can you research and explain any before or and after changes in your family, their business, or their home? Why, how, and when did this change take place? Did or does your family have any traditions for get-togethers, for holidays, or religious observances? How do these traditions relate to or derive from your own ancestors' lives or religion? Are any of these traditions particularly unique to your family? Did your genealogical research uncover any previously unknown family scandal, crime, indiscretion, or other secret? And if so, what would happen if you revealed this discovery of yours to your living relatives? How would they react if you spoke or wrote publicly about this forgotten family history? Were any of your ancestors or other family members the victims of violence, war, or a natural or man-made disaster? How did this tragedy affect the survivors in your family, and does it still affect your own family members? Has this tragedy from the past affected your beliefs and how you live your own life? Do you have any family recipes that have been handed down from generation to generation? How do these recipes contribute to your sense of family identity and unity? Have any family members tweaked old family recipes to make them more acceptable to modern day tastes? When, where, how, and why did your ancestors immigrate to the United States? What obstacles did they face when they arrived here, and how did they overcome them? Does your family history affect your attitude toward modern day immigration controversies? Finally, when you have written an article or other piece of writing about your family history, be sure to use your editing software spell checker and grammar checker, which may or may not catch all the errors. To verify the spelling of all names and places, use Google and other resources to double check any facts such as geography, historical references, chronology, and so forth. Either avoid or define any jargon or specialized terms that not everyone will understand. Be sure to cite your sources. Make it very clear to your readers what you have written so that they understand who said or wrote what. Attribute any content that is not common knowledge or that you did not write yourself. Ask yourself as you give your work one last read, is there anything that's going to confuse their reader? Is anything left unexplained or incomplete that should be inserted, clarified, or elaborated upon? Does your writing flow smoothly from one idea to the next and from one paragraph to the next? Be sure to add transitional words, phrases, or sentences to help your readers progress through the entire piece of writing. Finally, gain a sense of accomplishment and enjoyment from creating in your own words something in writing that can be shared with others and saved for posterity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martin. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll be happy to answer them. I can start us off with, is there a format or medium that is best suited for a novice writer who's just trying to get into maybe writing about their genealogy?
Well, I'd suggest starting with the stream of consciousness technique to just get your ideas down as soon as possible, and then gradually reorganize it into something more formal, following the steps that I've listed in these last few slides.
What are your thoughts on the editing or proofreading technique of reading backwards, in a sense, where you start at the end and read your sentences in reverse order?
I have not really found that to be of much help. Perhaps simply scanning through something very quickly is probably another way of doing that. It might help spotlight misspelled words or inconsistencies that are fairly short. It will not really help in terms of organizing a piece of writing. I really suggest write something to a certain degree of completeness, take a break, and come back to it at least 2 or 3 more times and read it from beginning to end.
What was the most exciting piece of family history that you've written on?
Oh, wow. Well, something that just happened very recently that I have not yet written about. I think most of us know that the famous writer Ernest Hemingway had multiple wives, one of whom was named Martha Gellhorn. I recently found that Martha Gellhorn was a relative of mine. And in order to make that discovery, I had to construct her family tree using various online resources. And I found a family tree of some of her relatives on genie.com that included my great-great-grandparents. So without having any knowledge of a direct connection, I was motivated to do this research because of the shared surname of Gellhorn. However, I did not know how or whether, in fact, my family was related to hers. And now I have found fairly convincing proof that Martha Gellhorn, Ernest Hemingway's wife, was in fact one of my cousins.
If you know your ancestor was a tanner in New England in 1800, how much general info should you include about tanners from that period, even if you can't be sure your ancestor actually lived that way?
I think providing information about a profession can just simply add some color to your narrative. One of my wife's ancestors, who had, I don't recall what his job was actually, but he, in his spare time, he was an inventor, and has 3 or 4 patents to his name. And even though his life was not particularly significant in terms of making any major inventions or discoveries, he did show a sense of creativity by inventing things that were patentable. And the documentation for that is available online from the US Patent Office. So adding information about someone's career, even if it was just an ordinary career, such as my father, who was just a cab driver, can simply just add color and interest to a portrait of your ancestor.
Any tips on dealing with genetic genealogy or DNA matches and things like that incorporated into your writing?
I'm not a major expert in that area. However, I have, my wife and I have both tested on all 3 of the major DNA websites: Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, and MyHeritage DNA. And I am still learning what the significance of various DNA matches are. The general guideline that I've been told by people who are more knowledgeable about DNA research is that it's to pay attention to both the number and size of the segments of your matches. For example, the measure called centimorgan. If you have someone who matches you with at least one piece of DNA that's at least 20 centimorgans, and maybe 3 or 4 additional segments that are at least 10 centimorgans, then it's worth paying attention to that particular person's match, and digging further to see if that person might be related to you.
What is the best way to go about securing copyright permissions to include?
Well, anytime you create something, even if you don't say it's, I'm not a major expert on this, but I have taken a couple seminars on this. Even if you don't say something is copyrighted, it is still considered, if it's your writing, it's considered copyrighted. You do not need to register anything formally with the government to obtain a copyright. You need to simply say copyright followed by usually the year and then your name at the top or at the bottom of whatever it is you've written. If you are quoting someone else's writing that has been copyrighted, there's something called fair use, which is kind of a very loose concept that's open to interpretation. Fair use involves the right to use brief excerpts of someone else's copyrighted material if you have clearly attributed it to that writer. If you are using more than a few short excerpts, you must obtain and should obtain, as a matter of ethics and law, written permission from the person who holds the copyright.
Alrighty, I don't see any more questions, but we can certainly give it a few moments to see if anybody thinks of anything. In the meantime, I would just like to thank Martin for agreeing to present today and sharing his knowledge and his experiences and his long writing career. People have commented some things, excellent sources. Thank you. They gave me some good ideas to consider. So you definitely have made an impact and provided some great information for people to think about as they move forward with their writing. I'd also just like to again remind everybody that October is National Family History Month, and even if you are not in the business of publishing, take a look to see if there are any classes available, or maybe start digging around on one or two interesting people in your family tree, or maybe just simply just go and getting your DNA done and seeing, maybe who you match with. The longer we wait to kind of preserve these memories and things, the harder it becomes. And I know in my own personal genealogy experiences, I've waited too long, and so have my parents. That a lot of information is now gone because people have passed. So kind of with right away, if you have a question about somebody, reach out to them before it's too late. Write down your questions, make time to do that so that information isn't lost. So yeah, I don't see any more questions. I will leave it with one last congratulatory. This was an excellent presentation, had wonderful information. We appreciate you coming to share your knowledge with us. So again, thank you, Martin. I'd like to thank everybody who attended today. You make our programming worthwhile, and we hope you come back for some of our other genealogy programs for later this month. And I will finally like to end with be safe, be well, and hopefully we can see you soon.
Thank you very much.